Frau Blum zum Verhör.
Millionen lesen die Romane von Heinrich Böll. Die aktuellste Erzählung des Nobelpreisträgers wurde zum erregenden Filmreport über eine gefährliche Krankheit unserer Zeit, den Meinungsterror.
The dominant theme in The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum is a critique of journalistic practices, especially in West Berlin. The antagonist of the story covers current events for the news and attempts to tarnish the reputation of the main character, Katharina Blum. He attempts to characterize her as a scandalous woman with communist political thoughts. He also accuses her of being an accomplice to the criminal activities of a man whom she had a romantic encounter with. All of this negative publicity is meant to take away from the honorable light that Katharina possessed previously. During the course of his exploitation of Katharina, Tokes, the antagonist of the film, uses her friends and family against her in order to convince his target audience that she is communist. She is such a persistent attempt on the part of Tokes to taint Katharina's honor has been read by some critics as a portrayal and indiction of him and his malicious journalistic practices. Tokes' defamation of Katharina and his participation in journalism that the First Amendment right-waving Americans would argue there are crucial issues of the right and wrong in journalistic practices. The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum illustrates the influences that communism has had on Germany and the disdain of the German public of Nazism after World War II. One could argue that the film condemns subjective versus objective journalistic practices. However, the supposedly objective narrator of his work represents Tokes' tactics in a negative light, indicating that his expose contributes to the social sickness. Ultimately, journalism in this story represents a societal practice by malicious journalists like Tokes that contributes to the social sickness of society.
If we want to look at this topic in a more relatable view, the United States can be a perfect example of media practices. Journalistic practices throughout the years have reflected similar principles in the U.S. American journalism had the living room war in the 1970s. In many aspects, the Americanized version of themes being addressed in Katharina Blum can be most easily seen by the type of television news that America was progressively getting more into. Showing American people to the American people allowed for the greater persecution and allowed for greater power in media. Whether or not you want to look at this news media to not only cover but manufacture stories, you wouldn't have to look that far back. With the introduction to the anchor position, there was an added trust element to give people a biased opinion versus just the facts. Examples of our argument in American journalist context can be seen through the media coverage of the American news hosts and their coverage of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall was seen as a win for capitalist learning countries. It's interesting how it was covered in a way where it was a changing of the political scene symbolically. Newscasters were told by producers to talk about how this wall was a win to the Western world, telling the viewers how to view this event.
If we want to take a real in-life look at how these newscasters and journalists can really almost explain to the viewer how to view their content, we have a really good example in this clip from ABC News. This was the 1989 announcement of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's given to us by a special reporter, Peter Jennings, and the things that we're really going to be looking at and analyzing in this clip are going to be the type of vocabulary that he's using, as well as the inflection that he's putting on the major points of the story of the fall of the Berlin Wall.
I'm Peter Jennings in New York. Just a short while ago, astonishing news from East Germany, where the East German authorities have said, in essence, that the Berlin Wall doesn't mean anything anymore. The wall that the East Germans put up in 1961 to keep its people in will now be breached by anybody who wants to leave. The East German media chief in the Communist Party said a short while ago that anyone who wants to leave East Germany and go anywhere in the world is free to do so. Anyone who wants to leave East Germany and travel to the West and return will need a visa, but visas will be granted, it is said, immediately or at least urgently by police stations all over the country. It is perhaps the most important announcement made in Central Europe since the end of World War II, certainly since the wall went up in 1961. Standing by in West Berlin.
After viewing this clip, we can definitely see that there's an agenda to the words that are being used in the clip to describe the fall of the socialist presence in East Germany or East Berlin in general. We see the type of language that he's using is very much used in a manner to dictate that this is a win. This is a win for a lot of different things, among them, capitalist Western values of America, and in general, this is trying to paint this in a way that we've overcome a major obstacle in the downfall of socialism and the downfall of the Berlin Wall in general. Another really interesting aspect about this clip is the way that Peter Jennings is actually telling us the level of which this event is going to carry weight in as far as world affairs goes. He at one point compares it to the biggest thing to come out of Central Europe since the end of World War II. While this isn't quite as egregious as some of the manufacturing of story or as exaggerated as the things that the reporter in the movie goes into, it does present the concepts that the journalist actually can implement their own opinions and thoughts on the matters they're reporting, as opposed to just giving a completely neutral coverage of the event.